All right, so I'm Joseph Carter. I'm the Life Teen High School Youth Minister here at St. Joseph's. It's been my home parish since I was 14. Some backstory about myself: I was actually a seminarian for the Archdiocese of Atlanta for the past 3 years. This is the first year that I've taken off from that, and I've been blessed to have this opportunity to be here to serve the community that brought me into the church and really fostered my faith and gave me the interests that I do now today, and the love of Christ I have. And so I'm very blessed to be here. So start off with a reading from the Gospel of Matthew. Come to me, all you who labor and are burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am meek and humble of heart. You will find rest for yourselves, for my yoke is easy and my burden light. Tonight I was asked to give a talk on, the title is Refreshed in Our Labors, How Relationship Determines Our Mission. And instantly the first thing that came to mind was the realization that our career is not our vocation, and that, to further emphasize what Dan put in the email he sent me, is that our identity is not our mission, right? So oftentimes I've seen people in my life, family members, and even my own self, where we take our career and we make it everything. We make it our end all, and we can be so absorbed with what we're doing in our day-to-day life that we actually forget our real mission, right? To know and love Christ. And not to only to know and love Christ, but to go to heaven, to get to heaven, and to get others to heaven. And it's in this idea of focusing on a career and the successes in our career, for whatever the reason may be, right? We can have really good intentions for wanting to do good in our career, whether that's make enough money for our family, for just success. Maybe our career is something good, like we want to be doctors and we want to be successful doctors and to bring glory to God by saving the most lives as possible, curing cancer. Doing any of these other things are really good things, right? That doesn't take away the goodness of it, but it still negates what we're still called to above all things, which is the mission of getting to heaven, to really know and love the Lord. And how do we do that? It's through our relationship with Him, right? And so it's when we neglect the relationship with God is when we start to see that our career and our mission become less and less fulfilling, where we're less and less fulfilled, and we can begin to be exhausted, even if we're in the exact place where God wants us to be. So it's no longer just like, am I in the right career? Am I in the right vocation? Even like you could be in the exact place where God wants you to be, but miss the entire point and just see right past Him who's standing right in front of you and focus on something so small without seeing the great beauty that's behind that, which He's trying to use to either be a tool to foster your own vocation, like most likely in marriage, like your career is to make the money, right? Like I said, to provide for your family. But what does that matter if there's no relationship with Christ? If the center of that is not somehow related back to that mission? And this isn't even an excuse for people maybe like a career for just like everyday jobs. Like this is true for priests and religious life too. And this starts to get into the actual like mission part of it. So it's no longer just a career, like our missions, right? So when I think of mission, my mission might be my career, right? To serve the teens here at the community. But like even a better example, priests. The career and vocation of the priests are one and the same, right? Their job is to be a priest. Their vocation is to be a priest. However, even if that's the case, if a priest neglects his relationship with Jesus Christ, his mission will fail, and he will not be an effective priest. He could do everything a priest is called to do and more. He could serve 5 masses a day and hear confessions for 16 hours a day. That's great. That's good. But maybe God's not calling him to that, and that he could do more good by simply having a relationship with God and praying and doing what He's asking him to do, rather than doing all these things that might be good on a tangible level that we can kind of observe, and what other people, and especially the secular world, might observe as like successful and good in our careers, vocations. But the relationship with Christ is paramount. It's that which actually gives us rest, right? It's not no longer our identity is something twisted. It's no longer giving us this kind of exhaustion of what we're doing because we're trying to think about what we're doing is right. We're trying to put these own expectations on ourselves, right? We're our own bosses and wanting to say we have these expectations of what we need to do. But in reality, God's trying to just tell us what we need to do right in front of us. And if we listen to him, not only are we going to find fulfillment, we're going to feel amazing. We're going to feel not as exhausted as we need to be, right? Not to say that what God is calling us to do is not challenging and exhausting, but there's relief. And it's very easy to sometimes see, if you've been through a drought in constellation and prayer, that to look back is like, when was the last time I asked God, what am I doing in my ministry? Me personally, I don't think I've asked God, what should I do in the past 2 weeks? And if I told somebody that, they'd be like, you're the high school youth minister. Shouldn't you be talking to God all the time? And I say, yes, I should be talking to God all the time. And I should have that relationship first and foremost. But I fail at that every single day, right? And not to say that I failed completely, because, God's grace, obviously, he's always calling me back to that. But it's not too late to start asking God right now, what do you want me to do? How can I build a relationship with you first and foremost, and what I'm called to do right now? Even if your career and mission is not clear, or maybe even think is kind of irrelevant to what God is calling us to do. God can use anything, even the most mundane job is like trash collecting, to make us holy and to make saints out of us, right? So when we don't know God perfectly, we're exhausted. And so most of our struggle is just not knowing God perfectly as he desires us, right, to go back. Because sometimes we might think that we're doing okay, that we're like, oh, I don't need to focus on this. I don't need to be focusing on my relationship with Christ. I'm good. I'm doing what he wants me to do. But you'd be surprised if you really asked him, what is that you're calling me to do right now? He might ask you to do something that's way left field of what you're actually thinking about you should be doing, right? It's so easy to say okay, God, I know what I'm doing, and then just close your eyes, and they're like, okay, God, don't worry, I'm following where you want me to do, where to go. And this is what's happening when we don't talk to the Lord in 2 weeks in our job, because he might have told us 5 miles back to take a left where we actually took a right, because we're listening to ourselves. And so saying that, we should be able to find rest in our mission, in our tasks. And not just when we're away from it, right? It's not just to say we should power through the day for our mission, whether that be our career in it, whether that be our mission as in what we want to do and abide, what we want to do with our community and the church right now. It's not to say that we need to just power through and then at the end of the day, then I can rest. And if I'm not exhausted, or if I'm not totally wiped out and I feel good at the end of the day, that's all that matters. You should find rest and constellation in the work you're doing, even if it's hard, even if it's so frustrating and draining, that Christ should be there in that. And that if you're not feeling it there, it takes more time to get to come to know Christ and how he wants to suffer with you, how you want to suffer with Christ in those moments, and to be able to find constellation in the exhaustion that's just necessary for some of our vocations in our daily lives. Because he doesn't promise peace all the time. He said he's going to come to bring the sword, and that's not just for others, but for our own interior life. So we're going to feel uncomfortable sometimes, but ultimately he desires for us to die to ourselves in that way, and to come into him even in our day-to-day lives, in something as mundane as career, or in our ministry as well. So let's just say, in theory, everything I talked about, you get perfectly. You're like, dude, Joseph, I got this. Everything you just said, I talk to God all the time. Ain't no way anything slipping past me. I am rock solid. You could tell me anything. I got it. Me and God like this. Super tight. But you still could be I'm doing everything right, but I'm still exhausted. Before, during, and after my mission. So it's what am I doing? What am I doing wrong if I'm doing everything right and I'm still exhausted and I'm still not fulfilled? And to that, I'm actually, I had a conversation with a friend today, and he asked me this. He said, Joseph, look at the cross, that cross right there, Christ crucified. And he asked me, and I asked everybody here, what's the first thing we should see when we look at Christ on the cross? What's the first thing we should see? Anybody? Anybody got it? Love. Anything else? Suffering. Jesus. Anything else? His death, crucifixion. It should be us. We should see ourselves on the cross. We shouldn't have to guess, like, every time we look at the cross. It shouldn't be abstract, right? And I was very convicted by this today because I said the same thing as everybody else. I was like, I don't know what you want me to say. Like, I feel like I'm a teen in Life Teen now. It's like, what do you want me to write down to get confirmed? Okay, like, just tell me. But we aren't called to abstract faith. We're called to actualize our faith, right? And so where am I getting at this? In the way of our mission and how our relationship with God ties to our mission and our own exhaustion in that, right? Is that sometimes we can be exhausted in our faith because we approach it abstractly. And I'm guilty of this particularly in my ministry right now. When I think about like what I do every week for my teens, just starting out as a youth minister, I'm like, okay, like I think I do everything right. Like I start off, like we have food, you know, good music and environment, and like we have a game to, like, kids love games, teens love games, like encouraging one another and like getting to know each other. Like that's fun, that's good. And then we go in our talk, right? That's amazing, that's great. We're gonna learn about Christ. Like these kids don't know about Christ. I'm gonna teach them Christ, and then they're gonna go in their small groups, and then they're gonna have so much fun. And like I have like the best like core members and small group leaders, which is so true. I'm very blessed. And then afterwards they're gonna be like, man, my mind is blown and I know everything about Christ. I'm ready to like be a martyr right now. That never happens. No teen has ever said that, right? And so I'm so convicted in my own self, because really what brings us to Christ, like all that is an abstraction. We're just talking about Christ all day. We aren't being Christ. I'm not giving these teens opportunities to be Christ, and that's how we actualize it. My friend today talked to me, he's like, why don't you just take them to a food bank? Why don't you just take them to feed the homeless? Why don't you take them and like actually go do something Christ did? I was like, legal reasons, legality, I have to worry about that, don't you know? And he said, don't worry about that. He used some very foul language I won't use in the church. But he convicted me, right? He's like, why should I care about that? Obviously, those are good reasons. I can't just go take all my teens to the downtown Atlanta and tell them to go talk to some homeless people. I actually have to be concerned about their safety. But he had a point. If I'm not taking these kids to actually be like Christ and actualize their faith in what we're trying to teach teens, and not only our teens, for ourselves, we're doing nothing but just like, I don't know, like a book club. It really feels like just like those people that like go to art shows or something and they look at art and they're like, yeah, like that's really interesting. I'm smart, I'm looking at art. Like that's what we are. That's what I feel like, at least, talking about it. Like I just feel like I'm some snobby art critic that thinks they know everything about art, which I might feel like, oh man, like I'm good, I know a lot about theology, I'm set, like I know Christ. I don't know anything about the Christ. The last time I talked to a homeless person was like December. Christ calls us to do that like every single day. How can I even call myself a Christian, let alone a Catholic, when the last time I actually did an act of service was December? And I'm supposed to be the leader in my community and showing these teens what Christ is, and I can't, because I'm here abstracting about my faith. And so if you're feeling exhausted, like I have since I've started this job, it's because we're not actualizing our faith. We're not actualizing what Christ is calling us to do, because it's in our acts of service that we find rest. People in the Bible, in the Gospels, found their rest when they experienced Christ. And all those experiences were through acts of service which Christ did to them. And in the same way, when we give ourselves, not just through philosophizing through God, not just philosophizing through God, not just talking and knowing about God, but to live as Christ did is where we find our rest. So if you're doing everything right and you're still not restful, go and serve, and there you will find rest. There you will find him. And I want to conclude with one final thought tonight. Because sometimes it can be scary to do this, right? Like I said, I can give this really, whatever talk this is, and it can be really easy to say, but how do I actualize it? Like, I could be afraid to do everything I just talked about. I could be afraid walking out of here like I'm convicted and I know what I need to do, but I'm so scared. One of my favorite quotes is from John Paul II. Come to really love this man since the beginning of my youth ministry. His calling back to the Gospel of Luke, Christ's words on the boat with some of the apostles, "Nolite timere, duc in altum, be not afraid, cast yourself into the deep." That is what God's calling us to do in our service. Do not be afraid if we can do the service good, correctly, how he wants us to do it, we won't fail in charity. Charity cannot fail. And over time, Christ will lead us deeper into what he's truly calling us towards. Nolite timere, duc in altum. Come to me, all you who labor and are burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am meek and humble of heart. You will find rest for yourselves, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Thank you.